One of the hotly discussed professional wrestling topics right now in the old interwebs and in the IWC in particular is TNA allegedly being up for sale. Now, of course, apparently there was a memo released, allegedly, I say allegedly, by Janice Carter saying that TNA is not up for sale. Don't believe everything that you hear on the internet, blah, blah, blah. I ain't buying that shit for a second. I fully believe that TNA is up for sale. As a company recently, they've been making a lot of decisions that reek of a company struggling financially, releasing all the talent that they've released over the past several months, getting rid of Hogan and Bischoff, and especially letting a Hogan go, because that's something that tied up a lot of money on a year in year out basis for TNA, reducing the number of live events, going back to the Impact Zone. Bottom line is this is a company that even if we don't know all the particulars of the inside financials, you can just look from the outside and see that it is a company that is clearly struggling. It's kind of like when you go to a Kmart. At one point in time, people forget Kmart was a giant in the retail industry. But you go to a Kmart now, you don't have to know all of the particulars of the inner workings of the company to know that that company is struggling. Just go into one of their stores. That's all you really need to see, period. Sometimes you could use your better judgment and common sense. So obviously a lot of debate and talk about who might buy TNA, da-da-da. I'm just doing this video throwing in my 2 cents on some of the possibilities of who might buy TNA, or in some cases who might lead a group to buy TNA, and who I ultimately would want to buy the company. One name that was hotly discussed a couple of weeks ago was Billy Corgan of the Smashing Pumpkins, who does his own thing with Resistance Pro Wrestling, and there was a lot of talk there. There was some logic to that in terms of it would seem to make sense on the peripheral, but it doesn't look like that's going to happen, at least at this point in time. Bottom line is with that one, it sounds like Corgan would have more of an extreme type of style, a harder hitting style, and that's not necessarily a bad thing for TNA. I just don't know if he's the type of guy that you would want running a nationally televised wrestling program. I don't at this point. So I'm glad it sounds like Billy Corgan's not in the running to buy TNA, because I don't think he's the right man for the job. I've heard talk again about Eric Bischoff potentially trying to round up a group to buy TNA. The last thing TNA needs is Eric Bischoff involved with that company in any way, shape, or form anymore. He's a decent TV guy, but he's a horrible wrestling guy, and this run in TNA of the past almost 4 years fucking proved it. His ultimate legacy to me, aces and eights. I could go on a lot further. He's an arrogant son of a bitch who thinks he's done a lot more to help the business than he really has, and that's a fact. So Eric Bischoff needs to stay as far the hell away from TNA and professional wrestling in general as he possibly can at this point, both for his own good and sanity and for the good of the business and the sanity of us as wrestling fans. And you hear about the founder, Jeff Jarrett, maybe wanting to get a group together to back him financially so he can buy his baby back from the Carter family and Panda Energy. And this on the surface would make a lot of sense, because at least I'll say this about Jeff Jarrett. As much as I don't like him, and as much as I disagree with him on a lot of things, mainly the constant pushing of his ass like he was ever a big deal or a main eventer where he's nothing more than a mid-card talent, is the fact that he has a passion for the company. He loves the company. It's his baby. So he would be willing to do whatever it took in order to save his baby. It would mean more to him to own TNA than anybody else that could come in and buy the company. And that's just the bottom line. But to me, the way I look at it is, Jarrett sold out years back. I have no interest in him being the guy that's running the company, being the number one man in charge. That's just it, period. I don't have any interest in seeing that. Does that mean he can't be involved in the company? No, I think he can still have a place and be involved in the company, but I don't think he needs to be running the day-to-day operations, being the number one man in charge. Now, of course, a lot of older wrestling fans are going to throw out the name of Ted Turner, and here's the bottom line. Ted Turner is still an icon when it comes to cable television, even if he's not involved with it a lot on a day-to-day basis anymore. And yes, he did once own WCW, and his company did once give Vince McMahon a run for his money. But you're talking about a Ted Turner who's going to be 75 years old this month, who probably, I don't think, even if he still has a hatred for Vince McMahon, and even if he still would love to get back at Vince McMahon, I just can't see where he would want to get into the professional wrestling business again at this point in time. I just don't see that. I don't see where a Ted Turner would want to come in and be a part of putting together a cable television product again. I don't see where he would want to be in charge of running the risk of paying out a lot of money for a wrestling company just to have it go belly up on him again. Bottom line. So it sounds better in fantasy than it does in reality, in my opinion. Jim Ross is a name I think that does make a lot of sense. He's a guy that has a great acumen for the business and is a good, solid businessman. So there are a lot of things, when you look at it, one of the greatest commentators of all time, a guy that's paid his dues in the business, been in the business 40-plus years, started off as a referee in Bill Watts' Mid-South territory. And, he was definitely the greatest VP of talent relations that the WWE has ever had. When he was in charge of talent relations, the company experienced a boom period. There's no coincidence there. It had a lot to do with Jim Ross, whether people want to necessarily give him the credit for that or not. But when you look at Jim Ross, he's a guy with some health issues. He's 61 years old. Does he really want to be away from Oklahoma, the state and home that he loves so much, that often, to be running a company, whether he be doing it in Nashville or doing it down in Orlando? Would he really want to do that? I don't think he would. Would he want to take on that burden and responsibility? I don't think so. It would be nice if he did, because I think he could do a lot of good for the company. He could do a lot of good for the professional wrestling business, but I just don't see him being a realistic player. And also, I think about it, too, from a standpoint of, would he just be somebody sent in by Vince to sabotage the company once and for all? Because to me, Jim Ross is ultimately a WWE guy, and, I don't think he could ever let that go, even though maybe he should. I think he'd be great for TNA. I'd love to see him involved in TNA, but I just don't see him buying the company at this point or leading a group to buy the company. Toby Keith, I think I've seen that name mentioned a little bit. And the reason I throw that out there is this is a guy worth a few $100 million who could probably finance his own deal to buy the company, so he wouldn't have to get a lot of investors involved. He could be kind of the one overseeing the show. He's been involved with wrestling at different times, but I just don't see where he have a lot of interest to get into cable television, to get into professional wrestling on a day-in, day-out basis. Donald Trump is a name that you'll hear because, again, this is a guy, another billionaire, so he could finance his own purchase of TNA without having to really get anybody else involved. You look at Trump, this is a guy that's been a good businessman over the years. In spite of some of his flaws that he does have, he has made some bad decisions at the same point in time. He is a guy with a huge ego that would love nothing more on the one hand to prove that he is the equal or better to Vince McMahon. So he would pump a lot of money into TNA. There is some appeal there. But then you'd also get the feeling it would be like TNA would now be called Trump Nonstop Action. And it would be from the Trump arena. You get what I'm saying. There are some good things that could go with it, but then it could just ultimately be another lame-ass publicity stunt to promote the Donald Trump name. And think about it this way. When Donald Trump was involved in the USFL in the 80s, a lot of people still to this day hold him responsible as being the primary person that drove the USFL into the ground and out of business. You really want that for TNA? Vince McMahon, obviously, in WWE, that's going to be a name you're going to hear a lot about. And when you think about it, it just doesn't really seem to have that much appeal, I would think, to Vince McMahon and the WWE. Look, when you bought WCW and you bought ECW, you were buying those video libraries, if nothing else. And you've made your money back on that $4 or $5 million investment so many times over. So many times over that you could blow $50 million on a Senate campaign here, $50 million on another dumbass Senate campaign there, and not have it hurt you too badly. In part because of great business decisions like that Vince McMahon made. That, to me, is still the greatest, has to be the single greatest investment that Vincent Kennedy McMahon ever made. Was pay $4 or $5 million for WCW's video library and make that money back so many times over using those videos on your on-demand and using them on your DVDs, etc., etc. But the difference is with TNA is they still have national cable television, whereas WCW and ECW did not when he bought them. There's a big difference there. And that difference being is that without that national cable television, that's all the company's really worth is the video libraries and the name. Just plunking it on this and that. What type of value does TNA's video library really have to Vince McMahon at this point? What type of value does the TNA name really have to Vince McMahon at this point? The better value that it has to Vince McMahon and the WWE at this point, frankly, is for somebody else to buy the company and raise its profile a little bit and get a better number 2 option in professional wrestling, and that's the truth. Viacom would seem to be a safe option here because they are the parent company of Spike TV, the network that Impact airs on every week. So they have some familiarities with it. Viacom is also the ones that, tries to force Bellator down our throats, and they like to have their say-so on what TNA can and can't do on Spike TV. So you would think, well, if you have that much input on it, you'd have the financial backing to be able to just buy the company as a whole and lock in TNA onto your Spike TV for however long you want to have it. Because no matter what we could say about Impact Wrestling, a lot of it true, the fact of the matter remains it still draws a decent cable television rating for Spike TV. It's one of their highest rated shows. So it would make sense for Viacom to want to keep that on one of their networks, Spike TV, and keep that company in-house. But the name that I want to see buy TNA is a bit out of left field. It's outside the three-point line, so to speak. But I think it does make some sense. You need a guy with a vision. You need a guy with a lot of money. You need a guy to come in and address TNA's biggest failings and weaknesses over the years of its existence, which is the lack of marketing and the lack of promotion of their product and their stars. And that's where I think Mark Cuban, the current owner of the Dallas Mavericks, could step in and get the job done for TNA. They might never get to the point, obviously, of being head-to-toe with WWE or head-to-head with WWE, but he would make a big difference. Mark Cuban's worth billions, so he'd have the money. He has the business sense to turn TNA around from a fiscal standpoint. He has the marketing and promotion background to grow the brand, grow the product, and make big stars out of some of the talents in TNA. If you say, well, what makes you say that? Look at what he did with the Dallas Mavericks. When he bought the Dallas Mavericks, that organization was in the shithole. Poor attendance, poor ratings on television, poor everything, merchandise sales, poor importance in general to the NBA brand as a whole. Mark Cuban came in and changed all of that. The Mavericks became a very important franchise to the NBA, and they became a very good franchise, a very successfully run franchise, a franchise that was competitive and also made money most every year, and ultimately won a championship a few years ago. Mark Cuban's a guy that I've wanted to buy a baseball team, whether it be my Chicago Cubs, or I thought he'd make some sense for the Pittsburgh Pirates. But to me, Mark Cuban, I think, would look at this, a guy in his early to mid-50s, with money to burn, a hole in his pocket, maybe wanting a new challenge like he once took on with the Dallas Mavericks. I could see him being a guy that would want to get involved in the day-to-day nuances and operations of cable television. I could see him being a guy that wanted to say, you know what, Vince, you're great, but I could be even better, and wanting to try and go toe-to-toe and head-to-head with Vince McMahon. And having the type of marketing and promotion background that a Mark Cuban does, he could actually grow the product. He could grow the company. He could grow TNA into a real deal, legit #2 wrestling company that would give WWE at least something to take notice of, and also give the boys and girls in the business a real viable alternative where if they don't like how WWE's utilizing them, they have somewhere else to go and they're not really taking a pay cut of any significant amount. And that's a very big deal in professional wrestling. So when I look at all the people that could possibly buy TNA, the one name that would stand out the most to me, the one name that if I ever heard him actually do it would make me mark the fuck out, that would be Mark Cuban. I realize it's not very realistic that it would ever happen, but God, if I had the chance to say it to Mark Cuban, I would. I'd lay out the case for him. Be like, look, you're better than Vince McMahon. You can do this. You're worth billions. You took the Dallas Mavericks, who were a joke of a franchise when you bought them, and made them a legit model franchise for the rest of the NBA, to emulate. You could do the same thing in professional wrestling and prove that not only are you a great sports owner, but you're also a great cable television mind. It's that simple. I really hope that I hear some type of buzz or some type of rumors at some point about Mark Cuban buying TNA. I doubt it, but a guy can dream, can he? But that's who I think should buy TNA. Let me know who you think should buy TNA in the comment section down below, or if you think nobody should buy TNA and the Carter family should just shutter it up, close the doors, and let TNA die. I want to hear your thoughts, and let me know why you feel the way you do.